So don't shut down some of your ideas before you even put them down on paper. You never know what will turn out pretty good or really bad. That's also something that will happen. And welcome back to the Digital Drawcast, the video podcast where I talk about digital art and my personal experiences with it. So, we're actually going to do something a little different today, in that this is actually a part 1 of a 3-part series all about character design and designing someone else's concept request. Everybody has an idea for a character, but sometimes getting that idea on paper is a bit challenging, especially if that character is someone else's idea. So this little mini-series is going to try and tackle the multi-stage process that is character design, so hopefully you can better go about creating and designing characters to their fullest potential. This character design that I'm working on was brought to me by a friend who is making a video game, and they asked me to develop some character and environment art for them. One of the characters they needed me to design for them was, surprise, a mermaid. First things first, a lot of my method for going about designing characters comes from some other artists that I am going to shout out here. First off is Keenan Lafferty and his concept design bootcamp series. And the other artist is Draw with Jazza and his How to Create Characters video. Both of them are fantastic artists, and honestly, you should really check out their YouTube channels. Like, what are you even doing here? Go watch them. Go watch them instead. They're better. But anyway, we be designing mermaids today. The first step to character design is having a concept, which for this example that I'm working on was already done for me, so that's a lot of the hard part basically done. My friend already had a concept in mind for their mermaid. To summarize real quick, the parameters for the mermaid were that they would be female, very fishy-like, at least more so than your traditional mermaid, with a long serpentine tail. The scales would cover the entirety of the body, with some of the scales also kind of in the hair, and the coloration would be mostly red and orange, with just a little bit of yellow, so a very fiery fish woman. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring attention to my first mistake, which was I was doing my initial sketches in blue rather than red. And color, okay, so for the first step, color isn't super important, at least in this first stage. But I knew the final design would be primarily red and orange. So changing the sketch to be red would give me a closer approximation of the final design. Because drawing with warm colors like red, it has a whole different feel to it than the cool colors. So the first stage of character development, should really be about getting ideas down onto paper. You're basically drawing several different variations of the same character, 10, 20, maybe more, depending on how vague of an idea you have. Even though I had specific parameters to go by for this design, for the mermaid, there was still a lot of room to play, like the hairstyle, the facial design, patterning of the scales, the tonal variation, and so on. Even if you have kind of a tight idea of what you think you want it to be like, you really should go through and try and sketch as many different variations of that idea as you can, so you can stumble upon something that maybe you didn't consider before and that might actually turn out better than your initial thought. Quick disclaimer, I don't show the facial design process in the speed paint, but the facial design process that I did, it's very similar to the body design process, except without the shading. I mainly focus just on the line art and the shape of the face rather than the shading. But it's similar enough that I felt I didn't need to include that section here. So when you're putting down your initial designs for a character, don't go crazy on detail. You need to make several versions of this single character, so stick to sketchy lines. Don't worry about making it look polished at all. I really don't waste any time in trying to make the lines clean or the shading perfectly within the lines. Save that kind of attention to detail for the final design. This is just the brainstorm session. Get messy, get creative, throw your ideas down onto that page. You really should focus more on the general shape of the character and the areas you want for light, mid, and dark tones. For human designs, it's the body proportions, clothes, and hair that really define the general shape and silhouette of a character. Now, this is an important concept. The silhouette of a character, if you were to take your design and make it a silhouette, would it still be distinct enough to recognize? Like, if you were to see a silhouette version of SpongeBob, you could still very easily recognize it as SpongeBob. And that's kind of what you want to go for when you're designing your own character. You want the silhouette to be distinct enough that people can recognize it on sight. Now, having a defined silhouette for your character isn't the end-all goal, but it is a very useful idea to help with creating recognizable characters. For my mermaid here, I was told she would have a slender, athletic build and that she didn't wear any clothes, so it was really only the hair and fin placement that would define the silhouette for this character. And the scale pattern would be what defined the tones, the tonal variation. For your own designs, I highly encourage you to be more explorative in designing the body shape of the character than I do with this one. I really only do 2 different body types for this mermaid design, but there's a reason for that. Let me explain. I already had a pretty strict guideline for the body shape, so it didn't make much sense to mess around with that. It didn't really make sense to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what kind of build this mermaid would have when I already was told a very clear and specific idea for what it should be. So what I did to expedite the process was draw essentially a base for the body and copy it several times and drew on top of that base, making alterations with each model. Now I'm going to add a caveat to this by saying even though I already knew the general build of the mermaid, I still made another base that differed from the first to get just a little bit more variation. Even though I had a clear idea of what it should have been, I still tweaked it just a little bit to get that hint of difference. And that's another really important concept for this first stage of character design: variation. Every model should be different from the others. If you get stuck and can't come up with other ideas, Google search references. And don't shy away from the designs that may seem a bit out there or you think might not work. You won't know until you give it a try. For example, one of the designs for this mermaid, the hair has an undercut, which in itself is a very distinct hairstyle that feels very different from the other hairstyles that I did. I really wasn't sure about it fitting with the aesthetic, but I ended up really liking it, and so did my friend. And it ended up being the hairstyle we went with for the rest of the designs. It ended up being what came out on top as the best one. So don't shut down some of your ideas before you even put them down on paper. You never know what will turn out pretty good or really bad. That's also something that will happen, but that's okay. This is the safe zone of the initial design phase. Having bad ideas put on paper can help you know what you don't want, which is just as important as knowing what you do want. So once you have all your iterations made, you must go through another process before moving on to the next stage, and that's selecting the features you like about each model and why you like them, and adding notes about what works and what doesn't. It's a good idea to create a new layer and just make these notes directly on the character sheet so you know exactly what the notes are referring to and you have a reference to go off of for future design phases. Now, for my case, all of these comments and notes were made by the person I was drawing these for, because they are ultimately the one who should make the decisions on the direction of the character design. At the end of the day, these mermaids are not my property. They're not mine to make a decision on. I can add a little bit of my own flair, but the final decision should really be going towards the person who will be using these. So let's go ahead and just talk about what I have lined up on the mermaid page for the last bit of this episode. One of the things that I noticed that I did a lot for the mermaids was that all of them have kind of longer hair. And I'm going to be honest, I don't remember if that was specified to me that the mermaid would have long hair, but I think it was kind of a general understanding that that's kind of the idea we both had when we were discussing what my friend had in mind for this mermaid. I was told that the hair would be a little bit messy, so what I did was I kind of did a general shape for all of the hair and colored it in, and then I went back in with the color that the hair was and just drew quick little flyaways on each of the hair to kind of give it a more messy look. And I think that actually worked pretty well, especially for the sketch phase. You want to stick loose, light, and free. You don't want to waste time making sure every hair is in place. For the patterning, we wanted to go for something that was kind of similar to a koi fish, but she also was thinking about maybe including some sort of underbelly. With each model, I kind of just played with what kind of patterns worked. Some of them I made them more snake-like, some of them include an underbelly, some of them have those koi fish type patterns. The last one was definitely one of the more interesting ones because I made the scales very distinct with those outlines just to make them stand out a bit more, and I know some koi fish actually have that too. And that's another thing. Even during your initial sketch phase, sometimes it's a good idea to look up references as well. Harkening back to my old advice, references are good. Nobody knows how to draw everything. Google search some things. Save yourself a lot of time. They didn't really have much in mind in terms of extra fins on the body. They just kind of had the tail fin, and that was it. But I still wanted to play around and see what would happen if I included some of those little pectoral fins. Like on the bottom one, I have a large pectoral fin. On one of them, I have arm fins coming off, and some of them have a couple of fins at different sections of the body, of the tail of the fin. And we ended up actually including some of those fins in the end. And even though this design was going to go to this person and it wasn't completely mine, it's okay if you add just a little bit extra to it. Just make sure you don't try and force your own idea into it. Ease back a little because it is their design. But you can show the person some of the ideas that you had by maybe including it on one or two of the models, And they might like it. You don't know. But again, don't push too hard on the issue. And I know I didn't include the faces in this section, but again, the process for creating the facial structure is very similar to how you create the general silhouette of the character themselves. You just do multiple variations of a face with features that you think would suit them. Or if you don't know at all what the face looks like, then go whatever comes to mind. Kind of just start throwing things at the wall and see what sticks. And that's really all this first stage is. It's just throwing your ideas at the wall, seeing what sticks, seeing what turns out good, and then picking the ones you like. And then taking those ideas and moving on to the next round, which we will do in the next episode. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and call this good and wrap this the 4th episode of the Digital Drawcast. As always, my signature sign-off. You never know what might work, so just try it. Okay. Goodbye.